Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Contra Costa Tail Spinners March swap. Delighted to see everybody here. I am here representing your co-hosts, me, Liz Nichols, and Sally Holtzman and Dana Sherry. And Sally's trying to get on. Dana is out of town, but we're all here in spirit to welcome listeners and storytellers alike. And as I think our friend Marion Ferranti likes to say, we're all storytellers, we're all story listeners. So we're going to jump in. We've got a lot of great stories tonight. We're going to have our first storyteller and then our featured storyteller. And our first storyteller is Renu Narayan, and she is here all the way from India, where it is morning rather than evening. And Renu has an original story. She said this is an original folktale, so I can't wait to hear it. Welcome.
आइए 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 कहानी सुनिए बहुत पुरानी कहानी है आइए आइए सुंदर कहानी सुनिए Come, listen to a story. It's a beautiful story, a very old story. Come, listen to stories. But nobody even glanced at the old man sitting on the doorstep just outside his house. Ramlal, wearing a crisp white kurta and an equally white dhoti, was sitting and shouting out the words, trying to find his voice above the level of hustle and bustle on the narrow streets of Varanasi. Bikers and cyclists were honking and tinkling their bells, trying to find their way, jostling amongst the pedestrians, most of them busy talking on their mobile phones. Ramlal sat and watched them for some time. Only one little girl, holding on to her mother's hand, tugged at her mother's hand and said, Mama, I want to listen to Grandpa's story. But her mother had no time. She held her hand tighter and said, Kavita, there's no time for stories. You're getting late for school and I'm getting late for work. Kavita turned around, waved and smiled at the old man. Ramlal waved and smiled too, feeling sad that children wanted stories, but adults had no time to tell them stories. Slowly he got up. He was tall and muscular, with a nice big white mustache, silvery hair, head full of hair for his age. He pushed open the door of his house, walked in, and shut the door. The sounds of traffic were now muffled. He had walked into a huge courtyard open to the sky. Right in the middle was a huge champak tree. The golden flowers had scattered on the floor, filling the air with fragrance. Ramlal took a deep breath, closed his eyes. There was only silence all around, but it was a comfortable silence. He went back to those days when the house had been filled with laughter and conversations, fights and quarrels. But everything had been settled. Everything had been sorted out immediately. So much of aroma coming from the kitchen, of dishes being cooked by the various women in the house. He had lived in a joint family. His grandparents, his parents, his uncles, his aunts, his cousins. The pitter-patter of children's feet had run up and down in the courtyard playing various games. He had been a renowned storyteller. He had sat down below this very tree. People had flocked in to listen to his stories, with his expressions, his words, his actions. He had brought the stories to life. Stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, stories of wisdom and wit that he had heard from his parents and grandparents. People had sat with rapt attention listening to him. They couldn't take their eyes off him. But now, those days were all gone. He had witnessed the death of his grandparents, the passing on of his parents. His aunts and uncles had also passed on. His cousins, his contemporaries had also passed on. His cousins' children had left for greener pastures. And one day, Dushyant, his own son, his only son, born late in his life, came to him along with his wife Sushma and said, Papa, we are leaving Varanasi. We don't want to live here anymore. Dushyant, this is your home, your heritage. You must live here. You must raise your children here. I'm sorry, Papa. Varanasi is not the place for me. Unlike you, I'm not illiterate. You are happy selling saris in your father's shop. And in the evening, you are happy telling stories. But I'm not like that. I'm a highly qualified engineer. My wife is a highly qualified surgeon. In fact, we've received offers from Mumbai. We are moving there. Sushma's parents have found a nice apartment for us close to her house, close to her parents' house. What? You discussed all this without telling me? Papa, this is our life we were discussing, not yours. You're free to come along with us. It's your decision. I will never ever leave this house. This is my heritage. I will stay here. Come on, Dushyant. You can't do this to me. Don't leave. Papa, we've already made up our minds. Please don't ask him. But Ramlal continued to ask Dushyant. Finally, Dushyant lost his temper. I hate Varanasi. I hate this house. And I hate you. He screamed, stunned by his son's response. Ramlal said, get out of this house. Dushyant was only too happy. Holding his wife's hand, he just walked out. Immediately regretting his word, Ramlal rushed out to call his son and daughter-in-law, but they were nowhere in sight. He went back inside and shut the door. Days went by, weeks and months went by, years had gone by. It was 10 years now since he had any news of them, but he kept himself busy. He woke up at 4 in the morning, had a bath, washed his clothes, put them out to dry. Then he would sit down, do his yoga, his meditation, he would offer prayers to the tree, to the gods inside the house. Then he would make a simple breakfast, have it, and go around cleaning the entire house. It would almost be lunchtime. He would make himself a simple lunch. After lunch, he would sit down on his grandfather's chair right outside his room. This chair had extendable arms. He would put up his feet, read the Hindi newspaper or one of his favorite books from the vast number of books he had in his collection. Gently, he would fall into a slumber. And when he woke up in the evening, he would make himself a hot cup of chai or tea, drink it with relish. Then he would walk to the temple about 2 kilometers away, Shiv temple, praying for his son and daughter-in-law, praying for their welfare. And he wondered whether there were any grandchildren. Were there? He didn't. But he prayed for their welfare too. Then he would come back home, have his dinner, and go to bed. He would sleep soundly till 4 o'clock the next day. But every day he never forgot to sit outside his house, shouting out, come, come, listen to a story, beautiful story, very old story. But nobody ever stopped to listen. One evening he heard a knock on the door. He opened it and his heart filled with joy. It was his son Dushyant, his wife Sushma, and a little girl about 7 to 8 years old. The little girl didn't stop for introductions. She rushed into the house, hugged Ramlal and said, Dadaji, I'm your granddaughter Radhika. Really? His eyes filled with tears. He picked her up, held her close to his heart, kissed her on the top of her head and said, Radhika, you have made my life so happy. He smiled at Sushma. Sushma smiled back, touched his feet and said, how are you, Papaji? I'm fine, dear, I'm fine. How are you all doing in Mumbai? We are so happy, Dadaji. I have a clinic of my own, and Dushyant has started his own business. He looked at Dushyant. Really, Dushyant? Dushyant turned his face away. He's still angry with me? Thought Ramda. Never mind. He had Sushma and now his darling granddaughter. Dadaji, Dadaji, she said, tugging at his dhoti. I heard you're a famous storyteller. You must tell me stories. Of course, Radhika, of course, he said. After dinner, when Dushyant had not opened his mouth, Radhika and her grandfather sat under the tree and he started telling her stories. From the Ramayana, from the Mahabharata, a man hungry to tell stories and a little girl hungry to receive them. Both of them spent a long time outside. It's only when Radhika started rubbing her eyes he realized that she was sleeping. Beti, my dear daughter, go inside, go to sleep. She went to sleep. The next morning, she followed him all around, helping him in his little chores and listening to stories. On the third day, he asked Sushma, How long do you intend to stay, Sushma? Only for about 10 days, Papaji. 10 days only, Mama. I want to stay here longer. I love this house. I love Dadaji. I love his stories. Yeah, you know very well we have a busy life in Mumbai and we have to go back. Why isn't Papa talking to Dadaji then? Ask Papa. Radhika and her father, who was as usual sitting at his laptop typing away. Papa, she said. He didn't look up. Papa, she said. Yes, Radhika. Papa, why aren't you talking to Dadaji? Radhika, it's a long story and I don't have the time for it. Can't you see I'm busy? Papa, you're always busy. Tell me now. Otherwise, I will not come back to Mumbai with you. Okay, okay. He told her the story about the quarrel. Then he said, my papa never had time for me. He was half the day he was in the sari shop selling sari. And the rest of the time, the house would be filled with strangers listening to his stories. He had no time for me. My mother passed away when I was very young. I felt left out. I felt unloved. And so I left. Papa, aren't you doing the same thing to me? You leave early in the morning when I'm still sleeping. And you come back home late in the night when I'm sleeping. And on Sundays, you're always on your phone or on your laptop. Or you're traveling. Papa, you can't be like this. Come and apologize to Dadaji. Now, now. She stamped her foot. Okay, okay, said her father. He came out, went to the tree where his father was sitting and said, Papa, I'm sorry. Ramlal immediately got up, hugged his son and said, it's okay, you're forgiven. I forgave you long ago but the day you left. I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have asked you to get out of the house. I should have understood that your life lies outside of Varanasi. That's when Dushyant started to cry. He held on to his father even tighter and said, Papa, I'm so sorry. It's okay, Dushyant. It's okay. Dadaji, Dadaji, will you come and stay with us in Mumbai, please? I can't come forever, Radhika, but I will come. I will come for a visit. Dadaji, if you promise to come for a visit, I will come and stay here every summer holidays with you. Promise. Really? Oh, Radhika, you've made my day. You've made my day, sweetheart. You've made my day. Ramlal's heart was filled with joy. Now he had 3 people to listen to his stories. Dushyant no longer sat in the room working on his laptop. He sat and they had conversations during meal times. They had a lovely time the rest of the holidays. And when Dushyant, Sushma, and Radhika left, Ramlal promised to visit them. And Radhika promised that she would come and stay with them during the summer holidays. That's the end of my story.
Oh, thank you so much, Renu. I love that story of 3 generations. And I loved how that is so universal and we can all identify with that. And at the same time, for us here, your story painted us as such a vivid picture of India and things that are different there. So it was a beautiful combination. Thank you.
Actually, you know, this is a damru. You all couldn't hear it. I bought this in Varanasi. And because I'd been to Varanasi, I saw the narrow street, the old part of Varanasi, which is also known as Benares or Kashi, which is a holy place for the Hindus. And it's only when I went there, I thought about this story. It's actually, I made up the story for building bridges, which is this year's theme for World Storytelling.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. It did build bridges. Absolutely. All right. Now we have our featured storyteller. I get to say a little more about her. And our featured storyteller is Melinda Ginn. And I met Melinda through Stagebridge. She is a graduate. A lot of you know what Stagebridge is, the senior theater company in Oakland that also has storytelling and music and all kinds of wonderful things. And she's a graduate of the Epic Storytelling program there. And she has been performing all over the Bay Area, all kinds of stages, but she grew up in East LA, something I didn't know about you. And the language of the streets and in the family included English, Spanish, and Yiddish. And I love this. She says the tacos were kosher and the shul or the synagogue was across the street from the Catholic Church. So very multicultural. upbringing. And with all that, she's been a psychologist for over 40 years, specializing in geriatric treatment. And she's also just delightful, a unique voice, and we're so glad to have you at our swap.
Oh, thank you so much, Liz. And my little kitty's here because she likes to tell the story too. And so we'll see what she has to say. So anyway, I also, before I start, just want to say a special hi to Sally, who finally was able to work her computer problems out. And I'm glad to see you down there in one of the squares, Sally. So yeah, I am a psychologist and I do specialize in geriatrics and also in treating medical issues. So the psychological aspects of major medical illnesses, my patients were all going through acute or chronic or life-threatening illnesses. And I started working in about 1980. And what I'm going to do today is tell you the story of the beginning and the end of my career. One of my very first patients I ever treated and one of the very last patients that I ever treated. And in 1980, when I started working, I was a hippie chick from Berkeley, and I had never worked in a professional setting before. And very early on, I heard Milton Erickson, who was a very famous psychiatrist, and he developed Ericksonian hypnosis. His technique was based completely on storytelling. So he would put people into trance and then tell them stories of healing. He was brilliant, and he once told, he officiated at a wedding of two of his students, and he told them to leave a trail of happiness and to look forward to the day they could look back. And now that I'm in my middle 70s, I find myself doing just that, of really looking back. But I do have to say, my life was not one long happiness trail. It was really quite a slog filled with, especially in my career, lots of doubt, worry. 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I would just about hit the floor crying because I would just feel so overwhelmed. And I think that one of the very first patients I ever treated, her name was Mrs. Leviston. That's not her real name. That's just what I call her. And while I was preparing to be a psychologist, I had a lot of, I would say, typical Berkeley kind of jobs. I worked as a waitress in a diner, and I was the night janitor at the local health food store, which used to be on Telegraph Avenue. And I was a dog groomer. And when I got my very first job at a major medical center as a psychologist, I knew I was uniquely unqualified to be in that position. And I figured it was really the fact that I was a dog groomer that tipped them over into wanting to have me be on the staff there. And after I'd been working for about 6 months, again, as a medical specialist and a geriatric specialist, I got this patient named Mrs. Leviston. She was probably in her 40s. I was in my middle 30s. And she was quite eager to see me. I remember her because she seemed so pedestrian to me in a way. She had on beige elastic waisted pants and a white cotton button-up shirt, and she was wearing white cotton socks and sneakers. And by the time I got her into my office, she said, Dr. Ginn, you just have to help me with my 14-year-old son. You see, he fights with his brother and his sister. I get calls all the time from his school that he's been bad, and his father is just determined to send him to military school, and I do not want that to happen. I really just don't know what to do with him anymore, so you've got to help me. And I just thought, oh crap, I know nothing about 14-year-old boys. I tried to think back into what I had learned in graduate school, and it was pretty much nothing. And then I thought a little bit about that I had actually helped my best friend raise her son from when he was 3 until he was 15. But we essentially treated him like he was a wild animal. And although we let him sleep in the house, we also basically had nothing ever to do with him and figured he would just raise himself. And we prayed every night that he wouldn't kill us in our sleep. And somehow I thought, I don't think that would be very reassuring to Mrs. Leviston if I told her that. And so instead I said, well, what other things do you think you could try in order to help your son? And she said, well, I could talk to our youth pastor. Do you think that would be helpful? And I thought, better him than me. But instead I said, well, why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself and tell me a little bit about your son? And she said, well, in a way, I don't really know that I know that much about my son. I do know how he interacts with his brother and his sister, and that's not very satisfying. But other than that, I keep trying to find out more about him. So I don't want to say I pry, but I do listen to his phone calls, and I have read his journal. And when I put his clothes away, I do kind of make a little extra room in his drawers so I can see if I can find any hints as to actually who he is. And of course, I thought, I really don't know who's got the problem here. Is it the son or is it the mother? Now, since I knew nothing about the son or teenage boys, I figured I would segue into talking about the mother and maybe deal with a little bit of, could she be just a tad intrusive? And I said, Mrs. Leviston, can I tell you a story? And she said, oh, anything that you think would be helpful. Well, I said, last year, I was going to be studying in Mexico City for about 3 months, and I had to learn how to drive. And so I figured I would take a driving course from a official driving teacher. And the first thing I said to him was, I'm so worried because there seems to be such danger in the streets here when people are driving. Cars dart in and out. They don't stop at signals. Pedestrians cross the street in the middle of the road. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt somebody. And he said to me, just focus on the first few feet in front of the hood of your car. If you keep your focus there and you eliminate any kind of distractions, you probably won't hurt anybody. You probably won't get in an accident or run somebody over. And I thought, well, I can try that. Now, Mrs. Leviston, I have a question for you. Do you think you could benefit from that driving teacher's advice? Do you think in your family you can just focus on the first few feet in front of your hood and no more distraction, not worry about your son, not worry about your husband, not worry about your 2 other children? Can I what? She said to me. Just keep your focus kind of narrow and just keep it, well, directly in front of your hood. Oh, Dr. Ginn, she looked at me. I think you've made this very clear. And in just 15 minutes, she said, I've only been here 15 minutes, and I think you've made it very clear. I've come to you with a tremendous problem in our family where my husband wants to send my son to military school, and my son seems to be getting into trouble everywhere he goes, and you tell me some cockamamie advice to just focus on the first few feet of my hood? And I thought, uh-oh, this isn't going well. Oh, yeah, Dr. Ginn. In fact, you know what you've just said to me? you've just given me advice that I think was pure baloney. Absolute cock and bull crap. And I don't think I really have anything else to say to you. In fact, I don't even know why I'm talking to you. She stood up. She put her coat over her arm. She grabbed her handbag and she looked right at me. Dr. Ginn, you are a total idiot. And she walked out the door. And she was starting to walk down the psychiatry corridor. And I did what any normal human being would do. I ran after her. And I was calling out to her, wait, don't go. I can fix this. And I saw all of my colleagues open up their doors, that they had heard this and they figured there was some kind of an emergency. And I thought, oh God, how am I going to explain this at the Monday morning staff meeting? And then I saw Mrs. Leviston at the end of our corridor, at the exit door, her hand on the push bar to leave. And I said, but Mrs. Leviston. And she turned around and she looked at me and she said, yep, total idiot. And boom, she opened up the door, and in a flash, just like the Roadrunner, she was out of there. All I saw was this cacophony of white socks and white sneakers as she departed the psychiatry service. Well, I have to say, her words stayed with me. I was a brand spanking new psychologist, and I probably never, ever forgot what Mrs. Leviston said to me, that I was a total idiot. And I have to say, I had no defense. She was right. I was a total idiot. But it didn't stop me from having a career. I worked for over 40 years. I treated thousands and thousands of patients. I taught in graduate schools. I mentored graduate students. I published articles. I taught at Berkeley. I mean, I did everything you would think a psychologist would want to do and could do. But then about 35 years later, I was now in my middle 60s, and I was tired. I was treating 500 patients. I had a roster of 500 patients. I was treating 90 people a week in a combination of individual treatment, group treatment, phone appointments. And I had taken to calling the retirement center almost once a month. Hello, is it time for me to retire yet? Do I have enough credits so I can get a pension and go? No, Dr. Ginn, not quite yet. I know we just talked last month, but things haven't changed that much. You probably still have a year or two to go. And I just felt exhausted. And I realized I was starting now to look for the signs that it was time for me to retire. But I got a brand new patient, an 85-year-old woman that I'll call Mrs. Richardson. Oh, Dr. G, I've been sad, real sad. My sister died last year, and I just haven't been able to get back on my feet. I hope you can help me. And I thought, how many patients I was already seeing, how long it took people to come back to see me. And I just kind of figured, oh gosh, I probably don't even have room to take on somebody that really needs my help. And I said, sure, why not? I'll make an appointment for you to come back and see me, but it might take a couple of months. And she said, okay, that's okay. And I said, tell me a little bit more about what has happened. Well, you see, Dr. G, I was living with my sister for the last 50 years. We lived in that senior building in Alameda, the one that's right on the beach. And, you know, once she died, life just hasn't had any meaning for me. And I need to get back on my feet. I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And I said, tell me a little bit about yourself and about your sister. And she said, well, first of all, you can call me Muriel. And my sister's name was Martha. And I said, did you grow up around here? Oh, yeah, I'm a third generation San Franciscan. Oh, okay. And Martha too. Oh, no, she grew up in Chicago. Oh, okay. Yeah, Martha came out here to get her master's degree at Berkeley. And I said, oh, and she said, yeah, we were introduced in 1956. I was 29 and she was 26. And I thought, oh, now I know what she means by sister. She really means spouse. But wasn't possible to really be that open back in the 1950s or for that generation of LGBT people that were raised back in the 50s. And I said, well, what did you do for a living? Oh, I was a horticulturist and Martha was a mystery writer. And we were happy from the very beginning. We were fit like hand in glove. And we courted for 5 years, and then we made it permanent by moving in together. And but now that she's gone, I want people to really know what she meant to me. And so I have some reconciling to do, and I'm prepared to do it. And I thought a lot about like what it was like for me as a lesbian psychologist to now be treating this 85-year-old woman who had never been able to come out. And she told me a little bit about her life. They had been active in the Daughters of Elitis, which was one of the very first lesbian societies. And of course, in the 1950s, you couldn't dance with a person of the same sex. So whether you were a woman or a man, you couldn't really be out or open about it at all. And yet they recognized what their relationship was all about, but they told very, very few people. She said to me, no need really to tell anyone. And I had read about all of this. I had known many women of her era, and I knew exactly what she was talking about and how hard it was to be open about who you were. It just wasn't like it is today, where you can be almost anything and you can be open about it. But they found ways to establish their life and to live full lives and to find other people that they could relate to. And so we talked quite a bit. She told me a lot more about Martha. She would say, Martha was a skinny little thing, but she didn't like to cook, but she loved when I would cook, especially if I would fry up some pork chops or make some veggie lasagna. And I just loved taking care of her. So over the course of time, we talked a lot more about their relationship. She was able to kind of bring Martha into the room with us. And after every single meeting with her, I would say to her, and would you like me to make an appointment for you to come back and see me? And she would say, yes. Now that appointment was always inevitably 2 months later. And so before I would see her, I would feel like this real urge to want to prepare for her, to make every single meeting meaningful for her, because I knew they were so infrequent and I just really, really wanted to help. So I would prepare, I would think about things, topics, I would, come up with resources. And after about a year, which was maybe about 4 or 5 visits, she was going back to having meals in the dining room where they lived. She was going on field trips. I had hooked her up with an LGBT friendly visitor, and she felt like she had found a friend in that person. And she knew she would only live kind of a half life without Martha, but she at least was able to get back into life. And that really meant something to her. So after our 6th visit, I said to her, and would you like me to make an appointment for you to come back and see me? And she said, well, yes, but honey, I have a question for you. And I said, well, what is it, Muriel? You can ask me anything. What is it? And she said, well, you are such a nice lady. And I did enjoy our talk today. But I do have one question. And I said, go ahead, Muriel, go ahead. And she said, have we ever met before? And I just thought, oh my God, there it is, the sign I've been waiting for. I had gone from being a total idiot to being pretty irrelevant. Anybody could have been treating her. And I had been thinking, oh, I need to really think about this. I need to put so much time into that. I need to be so helpful. And then the truth was, I'm not sure she recognized me. And that for me was the sign that even though I was slightly irrelevant, it wasn't really in a bad way. It was more like in a Buddhist way. It was like a having no self kind of way. And I just wanted to hug her. And I really kind of felt like she had shown me the light that in fact my work was done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melinda. That what a journey, what an arc, and what an ending. Not necessarily the ending we were expecting or you were expecting, but right in a way that you discovered. And I love the way you brought that to the big picture, like you said.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Oh, what a great start we've gotten to our evening. All right. So now we have a storyteller who, John, I'm not sure if you've come on Zoom. I know you've come in person when we were still meeting in the library, but John is a fellow storyteller at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco with me, and he's going to tell a story that he learned through the museum. Welcome, John.
Well, thanks, Liz. Yes, I'm going to tell a story this evening, a tale from one of my stories from the Asian Art Museum. In the year 1600, in the country of Japan, there lived a samurai by the name of Shijun. And like all samurai, Shijun was a master of the sword. But also like all samurai, Shijun was required to have an art, a yin, as it were, to the yang of his swordsmanship. And his art was collecting teacups. And Shijun had the finest collection of teacups in all Japan. One day, walking through town, he stopped at a tea house to get a drink. Sitting in his corner, sipping his tea, he suddenly noticed that his fingers were wet. And he looked down and realized the cup he was drinking out of was badly glazed and poorly fired. In fact, it was one of the worst cups he'd ever seen. Now, he was a very polite man, was Shijun. And he simply put the cup down, dried his hands, got up, and left. He was barely out of the tea house when a local businessman crossed to his table and put his hand out to take Shijun's cup. But before he could close his hand, the cup was snatched from the table. Shijun turned around and looked, and saw the tea house owner with a cup in his hand. And Sheehan the businessman said to the tea house owner, "I've got to have that cup." And the tea house owner said, "My tea house, my cup." No, you don't understand. Sheehan was admiring that cup. It must mean a lot. Yes, and it belongs to me. The businessman said to tea house owner, "I'll give you a koku." Now, no, a koku is a measure of volume. And in this context, it represents the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year. It was a very generous offer. And the businessman took it. The tea house owners took it. Apologies. The businessman took the cup, raced down to the marketplace, tried to sell it. The first person he came to looked at it and said, "I've never seen such a useless, worthless teacup." But you don't understand. Sheehan has just been admiring this teacup. I don't care who's been admiring that teacup. I'm not buying it. And so the businessman went from one shop to the next, one stall to the next, and nobody was interested in the teacup. The next morning, he went to Sheehan's, knocked. Sheehan came to the door, and the businessman looked at him and said, "Sheehan, you have cheated me." Sheehan reached for his sword. "What are you saying?" "No, sorry, you misunderstand me. Yesterday, I was in the tea house, and I saw you admiring a teacup, and I paid a koku for that teacup. I then took it down to the marketplace, and everyone there told me the cup was worthless. Well, I've based my purchase on your reputation." Sheehan then looked at the businessman and said, "Yes, the cup is worthless. However, my reputation is worth more to me than all the rice in Japan. And if you say you bought it on the basis of my reputation, I feel I owe a debt to you, and I shall buy the cup back from you for 10 koku." Of course, the businessman was very satisfied. And Sheehan took the cup and put it in his collection as a joke. But a week later, a young samurai came to the door. "Are you Lord Sheehan?" "Yes, I am." "I hear you bought a cup recently for 10 koku. What was it about the cup that makes it worth 10 koku?" "What business is that of yours?" "I'm on my way to see the emperor, and I want to take a gift for him. And I was wondering if your cup is unusual enough to qualify." Sheehan studied the young man and realized this is not a question of honor. For the young samurai, it was a question of power. And Sheehan hated men like that, who gave all samurai a bad name. So he smiled and he said, "Yes, I did pay 10 koku for a teacup, and it was a steal at that. For you see, this cup belonged to the Buddha. And every sip that the Buddha took in life, he took from this cup. And when the Buddha achieved nirvana, he took the essence of the cup with him. So the essence of this cup left it so fragile that the cup cannot hold liquid anymore. Let me show you." And he took tea, poured it into the cup, and the tea seeped out. "Oh," said the young samurai, "that is exactly what I need. Will you sell that to me?" And Shijin said, "Oh, I'm not sure about this. You know, this cup is quite unique. I would not part for it for less than 100 koku. Oh, it's a deal. Let's sign it." Shijin gave the cup to the young samurai. The samurai gave him 100 koku, and that was it. The next week, Shijin got an invitation from the emperor to go walking in the emperor's cherry orchard. And as they walked under the falling blossoms, they passed the emperor's tea house. And the emperor turned to Shijin and said, "Shijin, I've asked you to come for a reason. Some days ago, a young man, a young samurai, brought me a teacup and said it belonged to the Buddha, and said he'd been to the end of the earth and fought demons and dragons to get it for me. And yet, I look at it as the worst teacup I've ever seen. I would like you to look at it and tell me what you think." "Ah, my lord, I do not need to look at the cup. I made up those stories myself." And he told the emperor the full true story of the cup, and the emperor thought it was hysterical. Now, the art of the emperor was to write haiku. And he went into his tea house with the teacup, took a brush, dipped it in ink, and wrote a haiku on the side of the teacup, took it out, and gave it to Shijin. Shijin read the haiku. "Cherry blossoms fall, a gift from the emperor, the Buddha's cup." Shijin took this home and put it on the top shelf of his collection. The years passed, and the emperor passed on. And a short while after that, another young samurai came to Shijin's door. "Are you Lord Shijin?" "Yes, I am." And the young samurai bowed very deeply and said, "I am here that you have a teacup." "I have a great many teacups. Is there one specific teacup you're looking for?" "Yes, there is. I'm looking for a teacup on which our late emperor wrote a haiku." "Ah," said Shijin, "I have a cup from the late emperor. Oh, well, I would like to buy this teacup for 1,000 koku." "Ah," said Shijin, "this is the worst teacup I've ever seen. I would not sell it for a grain of rice. Never mind 1,000 koku." "Ah," said the young samurai, "my lord, you misunderstand. I am not interested in collecting teacups. I collect haiku. And a haiku written by our own late emperor in his own hand on a teacup is unique. There's no other in the world. And that is why it is worth 1,000 koku to me, easily." "Ah," said Shijin, "I see you're a man of honor, but I cannot give it or sell it to you because it was a gift to me, and it would be dishonorable to sell. However, if you were to give the 1,000 koku to the poorhouse in the community, I will give you the cup in honor of your services." And it is said that the cup still stands in a place of honor in the house of the descendants of the young samurai, the cup that fed 1,000 people for a full year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Loved it. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, John.
Mhm.
All right. Our next storyteller is going to be Emily Stemets. And I met Emily just for the first time via Zoom, via the SACS, in other words, Storytelling Association of California, which the reason we can be here all together is SACS Zoom account. And they also put on the monthly SACS genre events. And last time was myths and so forth. And Emily told an amazing version of a Greek myth. And it's just such a great way to connect with people because she's from San Diego and we're up here. So I'm going to put in the chat the link for the SAC genre series. Definitely go out and support it. It's $5, or if you're a SAC member, it's free. But right now, Emily, tell us a story.
All right. Oh, let me make sure I have a time. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. This is a story from China. This is called the Fish Basket Goddess. Now, there's a city called Luoyang in China, and it has been a very major capital city across many dynasties and throughout many centuries. And people come to this city from all four corners and all five directions to come to the capital city. Merchants come with their silk and their tea to sell. Students come still cramming for their imperial exams. And parents would pack sweet cakes for their kids to munch on while they watched the dancers and the acrobats and the puppets. But the city of Luoyang, it sits on a really wide part of the Luo River. And the only way to get to the city gates is to take a boat. And so people came and they would pack these beautiful lacquer lunch boxes for themselves and pile into these big boats. And as they crossed, they basically had a party. The crossing took so long that they would pull out all their snacks and they would tell stories and sing songs and laugh and get to know each other. And all was very well, except for one day. Their laughter and their song was so loud that deep in the green waters of the Luo River, buried in his silt bed, the river dragon king awoke. And he stretched and he rolled back his silt blankets and he straightened his whiskers. He had the finest whiskers in all of China. And the river dragon king, he's shiny gold and he's almost as long as the river itself. And this morning he woke up feeling a little extra dragony. And he heard all of that laughter and he said, "Oh, it's so loud." And then he took his big long tail and he started to swish it from side to side. And the water of the Luo River began to wave from side to side. And the Dragon King swished his tail bigger and stronger. And those waves got bigger and bigger and bigger until they started to slosh up over onto the riverbanks. And all of the people who were floating over his head in those boats capsized and tossed all of these people over into the rivers. Grandfathers and mothers and daughters and dogs and cats and lunchboxes all, whoop, splash. And the dragon heard all of these squeals and these splashes and he said, "Oh, well, little boy squealing like a wet rat. Music to my ears." And he spent all of that day laughing at that beautiful music that he heard. Well, he woke up the next morning and he stretched and he rolled back his silt blankets and he straightened his fine whiskers and he thrashed his tail from side to side. And the water of the river began to wave from side to side. And he thrashed his tail bigger and stronger, and those waves got bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of those boats started to capsize. And he goes, "Oh, it's to my ears, this is so delightful." But now one of those people who had been tossed over and capsized in a boat that day was a little girl. And she crawled her way up onto the riverbank. Her clothes were sticking to her and her hair was dripping, and she started to cry. Her pork bun had sunk to the bottom of those deep green rivers. And her little cat crawled up next to her and its fur was sticking to, you could see its ribs sticking out, and the little cat went, "Ow." Well, far above all of our heads in her heavenly palace was the goddess Guanyin. Now Guanyin, some white folks came over to China and we started calling her the goddess of compassion and the goddess of mercy. But first, she was known as the goddess who hears all the sounds of the world. And Guanyin, she heard that little girl crying and she heard that little cat meowing. And she knew she had to go down to Luoyang to help. So she descended from her heavenly palace and she stood on the riverbank, and the wave was still sloshing back and forth, but she stood right at the edge of where those waves slapped, just barely at the tips of her beautiful silk slippers. And she was wearing a long white robe that was embroidered with willow branches and lotus flowers and colorful fish all around the bottom. Her hair was shiny and sleek, and across her throat, she piles necklaces around her neck, and her throat is covered with these tokens and emblems. Well, she stood at that riverbank and she said, "River Dragon King, come talk to me." Now, the River Dragon King, he was deep down in the river taking a nap, and he was having this great dream about a banquet filled with crabs and shrimp, but he heard her voice and he woke up and he went, "Someone calls." And he swam his way up to the top of the river and he poked his head out so that just the top of his head and his eyeballs poked out of the water. And he saw this radiant being standing on his riverbank. And he said, and bubbles come out of his mouth. He couldn't even speak. She was so beautiful. And she said, "Honorable River Dragon King, I have come to ask you to stop this nonsense with the waves. It's true, they are very fun to watch. But did you know that many, many people are suffering just so that you can laugh at these waves?" And the River Dragon King popped the rest of his head up out of the river and water poured off. And he said, "I don't care. I'm having so much fun." And he lifted up his long golden tail behind him and water's pouring off his tail. And he lifted up over their heads and water rain sprinkling down on their foreheads. And he slaps his tail down the length of the river as hard as he can. Whack! And the water waves as high as mountains. And he laughed all the way. Guan Yin could hear his laughter as she went all the way back up to her heavenly palace. She knew she had to do something about this dragon, but she's the goddess of compassion. So she has to find a solution that is kind to everybody, even the dragon. So she thinks about it all night, and as dawn breaks, she exchanges that long white robe for fisherman's clothing. So some trousers that tuck in at the ankles, and she kind of ties it all with a rope. And she picks up a woven fish basket filled with fresh fish. And she descends back down from her heavenly palace and goes straight to the marketplace at Luoyang. She lays out a cloth and places her fish basket right in the center. Now, her fish are so fresh that their eyes are still moving, and everyone uses that as an excuse to come and stand close to this most beautiful fishmonger they had ever seen. She sells all of her fish in just a couple of minutes, and then the basket's sitting there empty, and all of the people stayed as close as they could to her. And she said, "I have no more fish to sell, so let's play a game. The person who throws the most money into my basket, I will marry them," which is a big deal because she's gonna have to come down from heaven and live on earth for like a human lifetime. And that's like really dirty and smelly and gross. So I will marry this person. But all of the coins that land on my cloth, we will use to build a bridge so that you all can cross safely over the top of the Dragon King. And the people cheer. This is a great idea. And the first person, he digs into his purse and he pulls out a silver coin. He's kind of a young man. And he gets himself ready. And he takes that coin and he tosses it. And it's right on target for that fish basket. But right at the last minute, a strong breeze comes and blows it right off. And it lands close to the fish basket, but not inside it. Now, the next man, he has patches all over his clothes, and he reaches in and he pulls out his last 2 pieces of copper, and he rubs them together for good luck, and he tosses them sandwiched together, and it looks like they're right on target, but they start to shimmy, and right at the end, they ricochet against each other and land close to the basket, but not inside it. Now, the last person, she was a woman, and she reaches inside her purse. She has the heaviest purse of everybody, and she pulls out a whole handful of gold coins. And she said, "That fish basket's so big, and I have so much money, there's no way I can lose this." And she tosses that whole fistful of gold coins all at the same time. And most of them go, every which way. But one of them is right on target. But it falls a tiny bit short, and it touches the rim of the fish basket, the round fish basket, and it starts to spin around the rim of the fish basket. And it bounces right out of the fish basket and lands close to the fish basket, but not inside it. Now, Guan Yin, she sat there all day long, and at the end of the day, her fabric was covered with piles of copper and silver and gold, but her fish basket was empty. Now, a year later, the River Dragon King, he woke up, he rolled back his silk blankets, he straightened his whiskers, and he started to thrash his tail from side to side. And the river waters of the Luo began to wave from side to side. And the River Dragon King listened for that beautiful music of the squeals and the splashes. But all he could hear was the sound of his own waves, because far over his head, a magnificent, sturdy bridge now stood. So all of the people, the fathers and the mothers and the grandfathers and the dogs and the cats, could cross over that bridge with their lunchboxes. And the Dragon King could make waves as big as he wanted to, but he was never going to be able to dunk another person or dog or cat or lunchbox. The end.
Thank you so much, Emily. Wow, how much energy and enthusiasm. If you lived up here, we'd love to have you be one of our Asian Art Museum storytellers. And in fact, I'm just putting in the chat, we are looking for more storytellers for our program. And so I'm putting a link to some info. But I especially loved the image of the coin going around and around and around. So many
Thank
great
you.
ones. Thank you. All right, moving on. Back to personal storytelling. I love how we have both kinds of stories, really great examples of both tonight and so many evenings. And Jane Cole is going to tell us something about snakes.
Well, when Pup met Dottie in 1945, he very quickly informed her that he had serious intent to wed. When Dottie met Pup, she was in correspondence with a contract to go to Guayaquil, Ecuador, to work in an American school. She said Pup's campaign promises included that if she would marry him, he could find work in construction in foreign countries and they could live and travel. One of her last letters from the American school contract negotiation was in February of 1946. In March, they were married. It took Pup about 3 years to find a job they both agreed would be a great adventure. In 1949, Dot joined Pup in Brazil. They lived in the interior, in the mountains, in an area that is sort of a combination of rolling grasslands and jungle. Now, the people in Itutinga enjoyed telling stories as much as we do. And a story they passed along was about giant anacondas, such big snakes that when they were finally captured and killed, they had armor and helmets from conquistadors. Well, one day, Pup was in the company truck, bouncing down a little rutted dirt road on his way to work with a co-worker. Up ahead, on the little dirt road, there was jungle on the right of them and jungle on the left. So it's just like almost a tunnel. And far up there across the road, dang, there was a log down across the road. And they thought, oh boy, now we're going to have to get out and see if we can move it. And if we can't move it, what have we got to cut it up and get it out of the way? The closer they came, the stranger that log looked. And finally, they got close enough to see that it was undulating and moving slowly across the road. It wasn't a log. They were dumbfounded. It was huge in circumference, just huge. They sat and watched. They waited and watched as the snake's body continued across the road. They watched, they waited, they waited, they watched, and finally the snake's form became thinner until finally the tail went across the road. That was snake story number 1. A few years down the road, Pup and Dottie were parents. One day, Dottie was pushing the baby buggy in front of the company houses in Itutinga. Down below was the job site for a big new dam. The company had built a little sidewalk in front of this string of company homes. And they built a little culvert. So it was sidewalk, culvert, and then a slight bank, and it went up into the yards of the company houses. And Dottie would push Karen and Janie, that's me, back and forth, up and down the sidewalk, over and over again. Little Janie, that's me, was running in and out of that culvert, up one side, down the other, up one side, down the other, up one side, down the other. Well, on one of our trips back along the sidewalk, Dottie spotted a little snake in the culvert, and right away, she recognized that it was a coral snake, very venomous, very deadly. Thank goodness Janie was on the outside of the sidewalk, on the other side of the buggy. So Dottie hustled her buggy and her children back up into the yard and went inside and found the gardener in the backyard and said, "Please, there's a coral snake out in the gutter. Please go out and kill it." He went out and he came back and he said, "It's already dead." But Dottie thought, how did I and how did my little Janie running in and out of the culvert not spot a dead coral snake on all of our trips back and forth on the sidewalk? Dottie was very relieved that that snake was out of the picture in whatever manner it was gone. And that is Brazilian snake story number 2. When Karen, my little sister, was still a baby, the next door neighbors used to come over and get her and take her back to their house to play with her. And that gave Dottie a break from taking care of her baby all the time. Well, one day, the little girl next door was bringing Karen home, and they had to go out their sidewalk to the front gate and along the sidewalk and back up the sidewalk up to our house. Now, my mom, Dottie, had planted a lawn in the front, grass. The Brazilian people said, "No, no, 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 do not do that." But she thought she wanted a lawn. Well, she saw the neighbor girl bringing Karen down the sidewalk from her house and across the front walk and start up the walk to our house. And then the girl started to run and jumped and ran up the steps into the front porch. And Dottie said, Jeannie, you cannot take the baby if you're going to run with her like that. That's not safe. And Jeannie said, but, there was a snake. And Dottie said, well, where? And Jeannie said, it was across the sidewalk. And Dottie said, well, why did you run? And Jeannie said, well, I couldn't see its head and I couldn't see its tail. And so I just jumped over it and brought Karen back up to the front porch. And Dottie said, oh my gosh, that's frightening. Please, you can never take the baby again if you're going to do something like that. That's Brazilian snake story number 3.
No more.
So one day in the afternoon, the gardener came to Dottie and said, oh, Miss Cole, in Portuguese, Dona Dorotea, did you hear? There was a big anaconda which came down through the yards. And Dottie said, no, I did not hear this. And he said, oh, yes, it came down this fence line and went along that backyard fence. And then it went down the fence line and then it went over that way. And she said, well, why didn't you tell me? Janie was in the backyard playing and she's certainly small enough that an anaconda could eat her since it can eat a goat. And he said, oh, we don't worry too much about them. We just stay away. So that's 4 Brazilian snake stories. Now, leap forward many, many, many years. Dottie was living with Janie and Steve, and she had had her 100th birthday and was entering her 101st year. Janie and Steve and Dottie were going to watch Nova on PBS television. Dottie wandered off to put her pajamas on and brush her teeth. Janie said, Mom, come out. This show is going to be about hunting anacondas in the Amazon. Dottie shuffled out with her toothbrush in hand and said, been there, done that. I'm going to bed.
Thank you, Jane. I've heard the expression snake in the grass, but now I feel like I've really experienced it through your story. Okay, we've got more stories, so we're going to move along. Our next storyteller is Jean Pimentel, who also comes to our swap through Stage Bridge, and I'm glad you're back, Jean. Tell us the story.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My story I might call community. As many of you know, I'm not from here originally, but I've lived in the Bay Area most of my adult life. First of all, in Marin County, and then in Kensington, and now in Berkeley. And I found community in all those places that I've lived and loved it. But for 4 years, my first husband, Frank, and I had to move to Los Angeles. We both worked in the film industry, and there just wasn't much going on there at this time. And so we moved down there, and we moved around quite a bit because we couldn't find a decent place to live. And then suddenly he came home and said, I found a boat. Now, we'd always wanted to live on a boat, or at least when we were first married, we thought it would be great fun. He had a background in sailing, and but we never found the right boat, and gradually that sort of faded. But then he said, I found the perfect boat. It was elegant. It was moored in the Marina del Rey, which is a very elegant marina right off Venice, California, near Los Angeles. But by then, we had 2 small children, and we both had very demanding full-time jobs. And honestly, it wasn't very much fun, especially for me. And that's where our marriage broke up. Well, I couldn't wait to get onto land and find a home on land. Now, Marina del Rey is close to Venice, but I didn't have any money. The breakup had left me with very little money, very little time. I had the children and my job, and I didn't have time to look very far. So I couldn't afford to live near fabulous Venice Beach, nor even in near the downtown area, which is kind of trendy but quite expensive. The only place I could find to live was on the southeastern corner of Venice, which was essentially the ghetto. Well, that was fine with me. I've always, I grew up in low-income housing, and I have a lot of black friends. I've always got on well with Black people. So I found that the neighborhood was quite friendly, and I found a nice little house on the corner with its own backyard, which was very important to me. Now, over the back fence, there lived a girl called Brenda. Brenda was about 12 years old, and she was kind of rough around the edges, which wasn't surprising if you heard all the bangs and the curses and the noise that came from her house. So I felt sorry for her, and I was friendly with her. So on Sundays, I used to like to take my kids to the beach, and I had a big old station wagon. And in those days, there were no seatbelt laws or anything like that. So I used to ask the neighborhood kids, hey, you want to go to the beach? Pile them all into the station wagon if their parents approved. And we'd go off, spend Sunday afternoons at the beach. And those kids, a lot of them never went anywhere like that. So that was good. But Saturdays, of course, were chore days, as they are for most working people. And one Saturday, I'd just come home from doing a big marketing. I was unloading my groceries from the car to the house and just started unpacking them. And I suddenly realized I'd left my purse on the front porch on the bench there. I rushed out to see if it was still there. Yes, wide open. And my wallet was gone. Oh my God. All those, my credit card, my driver's license, everything I needed was there. And I knew how difficult that was and how time consuming to get all those things back. Just then, Brenda sidled up and I said, oh, Brenda, somebody stole my purse. Did you see anyone come up here? I didn't take it. No, of course you didn't. I didn't think you did. But oh, it had all my ID in it. And I just want to get my wallet back. It's the wallet that I care about. Well, she shrugged and walked away. So I thought, well, I guess I better call the police. Isn't that what you do when you're robbed? I went in and called the police, and they came very quickly. But when those 2 big black cruisers turned the corner, all the little kids in the street, they just disappeared. And 3 big, burly, white police officers got out, guns on their belts. And the one in front was swinging his nightstick. And I looked at him, I said, what are you doing with that thing? This isn't a violent crime. Stop, go away. He looked at me and said, you don't want to file a police report? I said, no, never mind. Well, he smirked at this stupid woman, and they left. Well, I did feel stupid. First of all, for leaving my purse on the front porch, which is not very sensible in any urban environment. Wasn't then and isn't now. But I also felt stupid bringing the LAPD into this neighborhood. I'd heard enough even then about how they treated people, particularly Black people. But, I was shocked about my person. I wasn't thinking about that. And then Brenda sidled up about again. And I said, she was looking kind of fearful. And I said, oh, don't worry, they've gone. They're not coming back. It's not the money I care about. It's the credit cards. You see, it's really difficult for me without those credit cards. She drifted away again. So I moved back into the house, and I knew I'd never get it back now. I went back into the house and started unpacking my groceries. And about half taking care of my kids. About half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. I went to the door and I opened it. And there was one of the little neighbor boys. And he handed me my wallet with all the ID intact. I thanked him so profusely. Of course, I couldn't give him a reward because naturally all the cash had gone. I expected that. He said, I found it in a trash can. I said, oh, thank you. And I realized I had found my community and they had really come through for me. That's my story.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thank you. Community is so important. And today and always has been, still is. Thanks. All right. We have one more storyteller this evening, but I want to just take a few moments to share some sad news that some of you will have known. A wonderful storyteller and a wonderful member of Stagebridge, who I just learned passed away this week. That's Susan Goldstein. And so Agnes Reedman, who I think came to Stagebridge maybe partly because of Susan, shared with me this news, and is, I think she's still here. I don't know if she's still here.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
still here.
Here. Yeah. Did you want to share just a few words about?
Well, I hadn't planned to. I'll just say some of us remember her. And Liz, I think, I mean, I know when she and I joined, well, she was there ahead of me, but I'm the reason, she's the reason I'm there. But you
Yeah.
were our storytelling teacher back in those days.
Right.
And Kirk was there, but you were our first teacher, my first teacher. Anyway, I don't know, she was a natural. She used to, her favorite thing was to tell either political stories or stories about social justice. She had taught women's studies at Diablo Valley College, and she was still very much an educator. As she told entertaining stories, they usually had a purpose, an educational purpose. And she was also very supportive of other tellers. She never had a bad word to say about anyone. Anyway,
She had a special smile, didn't she?
yes,
Very special smile.
she had an infectious, special smile. And actually, her partner, Victor, of many years, used to say that. He has deceased now too. But one time I asked him, I said, why were you first attracted to Susan? And he said, oh, that smile. So a lot of people knew that smile. But she died very unexpectedly. In fact, it looked like she had been reading the New York Times that afternoon, and then it looked like she died. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have people around who remembered her. And thank you both. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. And thank both you, Liz and Sally, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Agnes, for
Mhm.
sharing. And,
Mhm.
you know, storytelling is a community, and she was a very special part
Yes.
of a lot of our community. So thank you.
Mhm.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah. All right. So speaking of community, another wonderful member of our storytelling community and former co-host of the Contra Costa Tale Spinners is Bobby Kincaid. And Bobby, you're going to share the last story tonight. And it's, I think it's another dragon story. So we get two dragon stories tonight
Good.
for the year of the dragon.
That's
Here we
right.
go. It's the year of the dragon, and it's the wood dragon. He's not as spectacular as the golden dragon or the fire dragon or the water dragon. He's a little timid. He doesn't have very good friendships made, but he's powerful. He has strength and wisdom and protection. And this is the second story in a series I told at the Asian Art Museum. Last week I told Pengu, excuse me, I would take the kids up this white hallway and then tell about the creation story. And then when he passed away, he became China, and he left his mother Ying and his father Yang, and they became dragons. And slowly over the centuries, as the people developed, they became humans and wore these lovely gowns with dragons stitched in them. And she was the queen mother of the West, and he was the queen father of the East. And they lived in this enormous mountain. And in the Asian Art Museum, we go up the hall, open the door, and there's all these wonderful treasures. So I would introduce them to the jade dragon on one of the pots. And then I would introduce them to the phoenix on another pot. And then I'd take them over to this wooden sculpture. And they had all these people going up the top, going up. And at the top was the castle and this big terrace. And that's where the mother of the West and the father of the East lived. Now, to start the story, when Pangu died, the jade dragon decided to live in the heavens above, as so did the phoenix. And they shared a cove, the fairy cove. And he lived in the cave and she lived in the trees, and they'd play every day. They'd play and have fun. Well, one day when they were playing, they saw this stone. It had a funny shape, but it glowed. And Phoenix said, "Hey, let's take that stone and let's chip it, make it smooth and round." And the dragon, he loved that. He says, "Yeah." So they started. He'd claw it and she'd peck it. He clawed it and she pecked it. Well, of course, this took many, many years. Finally, they had this beautiful, beautiful stone. And so a dragon said, "I'm going to go get some pure water from my cave." And the phoenix said, "Well, I'm going to go to the fairy inlet and we'll get some water and we'll sprinkle on it." So when they sprinkled this water on it, the stone went out like this with light. And then they knew that this stone had magic powers. They watched it, and down on earth, it controlled the ebb and flow of the oceans. And then the moon, it controlled the phases of the moon. It had control of the rain and thunder and the lightning, and it gave birth and death and rebirth. It had wisdom in it, and it granted wishes. Well, they would watch the stone up on a cloud, and it would make the trees grow greener down on earth and the flowers bigger, and there's plenty of water. And the farmers had their fields full of grains. They were rich. And so they decided that they'd just leave it perched up there on this cloud so everybody could see this marvelous glow. Well, of course, one day the mother of the West came out, and she looked up in the skies and she saw this beautiful glow. And she said to her guards, "I want that. I want that glow." So they searched all over and they found it set up on a cloud. Of course, dragon and phoenix were sleeping. So they brought the stone down, and as soon as she held it in her hand, she knew it had that magic power. It was controlling the oceans and the moon and the weather, and she could tell it controlled birth and death and rebirth. And she felt she had wisdom with this, and she knew she could grant wishes. So she took this stone, and in this big mountain that they lived on. It was 33,000 feet up in the air. She had 9 keys and she unlocked them going down in here into that mountain, and she placed the stone in a special spot. And she said, I'm going to keep this. When the 3,000th birthday comes up and the gods and semi-gods each the peach for immortality, I'm going to show them this stone. They'll be very interesting. So she locked it all up. In the meantime, the dragon was distressed. The phoenix was distressed. They asked everybody all over where this stone was. Nobody knew where it was. Everybody was looking. They looked and looked and looked for many, many years. Pretty soon, down on this big mountain, 33,000-foot mountain, the queen was having her big party, the 3,000-year party when the peaches ripened. And when the gods and semi-gods ate these peaches, they were immortal for another 3,000 years. Well, they're all coming up the mountain, getting ready. She had her terraces all ready for the party, the eats and the drinks, and they arrived. And she said, I have a special surprise for everybody today before you eat the peach. So she unlocked all those chambers, went down, put the stone on a very special little pillow on a platter and carried it up. And when she carried it up, that thing just glowed and the light sparked all over. Well, in the meantime, the phoenix said to dragon, hey, look at that light down there. And he said, yes, that looks like our pearl. And he opened up the clouds. He says, yes, it's on that tall mountain that belongs to the Queen of the West. So boy, they went down like this. And as she was holding up this platter with this beautiful pearl on it, here came Phoenix and Dragon, and they were pawing at it and clawing at it. And they said, how did you get this? And she said, I found it. And they said, no, we had it on a cloud up there. You took it, you stole it. She said, no, it was all by itself. It belongs to me, because she knew the magic powers. Well, they clawed at it and pulled at it, and they grabbed her, and the tray tilted, and it bumbled, went through a hole in the terrace, and it fell down, 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 and plunked on the dry dirt of the earth, and little pieces fell off, and then it rolled into the West Lake. Well, Phoenix and Dragon looked at it, and they could see that it still had its glow on top of the lake, so they decided they would become mountains on the side, and the water that trickled out, they would protect it. So from now on, from that time until right now, that West Lake is protected with those 2 mountains. And of course, men heard of this story, and they wanted the power, because the dragon now keeps that pearl tucked under all the other dragons up under his chin. And men wanted the power and magic of the dragon. So next week, I'm going to tell you a story about men and the river. Thank you so much for listening. And I want to thank you all for the wonderful stories you told. They were glorious.
Thank you, Bob. That was fantastic.
All right. Probably
I
a
want
little.
to see the West Lake with my own eyes.
Yeah. All right. Oh, and my granddaughter and my great-granddaughter came to hear that story.
Oh, lovely.
Yes, yes,
Lovely.
yes.
We were talking about storytelling and generations. That's how we started with Renu's story at the beginning, and now we have generations on our Zoom. So
Yeah.
now Sally, who wasn't able to, I don't know, Sally is, it says she's here, but I don't know if she can come on screen or whether she really is able to be here. But Sally usually is the one who says goodbye and thank you. So I'm just kind of checking to see whether she might be here.
Hello,
There you are, Sally. Okay.
but I can't get a picture on.
All right, but we can hear you.
What a lovely evening. I thought I'd never get here, and finally I did, and heard all these glorious stories. Thank you so very much. Lovely to be with you all. Yay, yay. Have a wonderful month coming up, and we'll see you in March, April. Yes, yes.
Right.
Enjoyed the story so much. Thanks to all the participants who came to listen. You're really, really appreciated. Have a good time. Find your own stories. Come back and share them with us.
All right, we can end our